Hey everyone, just a quick note before we begin. I realize that this episode is arriving the day that the second episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds has been made available on Paramount Plus, but we wanted to make sure that we were able to get the full panel to talk at least about the premiere, and we're going to try to get the full panel to talk about the season going forward. So that accounts for this delay. I know that Discovery Debrief listeners are used to delays, but this is a pretty special occasion, as you're about to learn through this episode in particular. So I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you continue to come along for the ride. And again, just a reminder, especially if anybody new is listening to this episode, Discovery Debrief is a supplement to your watching experience, not a replacement for it. So without further ado, please enjoy this episode, talking about the series premiere of Star Trek Strange New Worlds.
Are you listening to Discovery Debrief? And so did I. It's Jason Isaacs, who was, at some point, some version of Captain Lorca. Right now, I'm just a fan.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Discovery Debrief, a podcast setting a course to discuss the future of the final frontier in Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Lower Decks, Prodigy, and more. I'm co-host Chris Clow, and I'm joined by our full panel of Star Trek franchise explorers. Rachael Clow.
The pain, it is unbearable.
Oh, that's going to go again. I didn't mean to do that.
Very fitting
Tyler
soundtrack
Monaghan.
for that sentiment. Yes, sir. I am merely a cadet on a training rotation, and I'm so pleased to be on the bridge with you today.
Thank you, sir. We're glad to have you. And also, as Zach Brannigan would say, do my eyes believe me? Zaki Hasan has returned.
No agony booth today, because I'm a lucky man.
And finally, of course, last but certainly not least, the incomparable, inconceivable Cicero Holmes.
Hit it.
There are few better words to use when it comes to this. Well, tonight I've temporarily assumed command once again because I'm a very selfish man. And I'm selfish because this is frankly, and this might sound hyperbolic, but it really isn't. This is an occasion I've waited my entire life for. We're assembled here today to discuss the very first episode of another new series in the ever-expanding Star Trek franchise. This one hits a little differently, though, because not only does it serve as a follow-up to one of the stronger seasons of the franchise's resurgence, but it's a series you could argue has been coming since about 1964? The premiere episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds has finally been released, which brings the franchise back to the bridge of the original U.S.S. Enterprise, this time under the command of Captain Christopher Pike. So being the selfish man that I am, I want to explain a little bit about why I've been looking forward to this show for so long, because I think it'll be helpful for our listeners to understand how strongly I feel, not just about this show, but about this episode in particular. So I was rather surprised at how overcome with emotion I was just when this episode started. And I have a witness who can attest to this because it didn't take long for the waterworks to start flowing, because this is really a concept in a show that goes back to when I was a child and when I should have been maybe doing some Bible studying. The book that I most often had open in my room with the door closed was the Star Trek Encyclopedia by Michael and Denise Okuda, with contributions by Doug Drexler and Debbie Merrick. I had the version that was released in, I had the first one in 1994, and then I had a hardcover version that was released in 1997, just after Star Trek First Contact. And that was very much like, for all intents and purposes, that was my religious text. I spent so much time poring over that book. And this was the era when I was a kid in the mid to late 90s, where Star Trek was only really accessible in terms of the original series through reruns, if you were fortunate enough to catch them. Sci-fi marathons were like heaven to me when Star Trek TOS marathons came to the Sci-Fi Channel, but also just renting VHS tapes. But even when I did have the chance to rent those VHS tapes, I knew those stories backwards and forwards because of my obsessive reading of the encyclopedia. And as much as I love TOS, and I still say it's my favorite show in the entire franchise, I was rather fixated on the entries having to do with the Telosians, with Captain Christopher Pike, with Captain Robert April, with Number One, with Yeoman Colt. The Cage, for some reason, just like stuck in my 8 to 10-year-old brain as something that I just wanted to see more from. And this was also, unfortunately, after I really was able to check in on like comic book series that took place during this time. The material that I had access to was limited, but I always wanted to see some sort of official extension of the Star Trek franchise in this period with these characters. And so a couple of years ago, when we did the season 1 finale recap for Discovery, Rachel captured the moment where the Enterprise appears on the screen and how I freaked the hell out when that happened, when the Enterprise first comes into view. Because all of a sudden, like, we had talked on this show about how, oh, we're not going to see the Enterprise. They're talking about the Constitution class, but I don't think, at least I certainly didn't. And if you guys did, then you had a hell of a poker face. But I didn't expect the Enterprise. As soon as the Enterprise showed up, I realized that that was all of a sudden something that, as a fan, was within grasp. And so this has been a long time coming. And as soon as the credits started rolling, it was a shockingly emotional moment just to see the beginning of the show, to say nothing about the actual content of the episode that we're going to discuss today. So I said before we started recording, I'm actually afraid of how much I like this show. So that also, I want to get it out there because I'm probably a little more biased than most of these gentlemen are. Maybe not all of you, but most of you. And certainly more biased than the lady of the group. Because I'm kind of in the tank for this show already. And for what it's worth, the first episode justified that. So with that said, with my monologue out of the way and with the table set, the end of the self-indulgence, keeping with the theme of the show itself, what we're going to do here is revive the point-by-point episode discussions of old that we used to do in this show's earliest days. So without further ado, let's get into the premiere episode of this new series, which shares a title with the show itself, Strange New Worlds. So before we actually do start recapping, I would like to get some overall impressions from everyone. The lucky man that he is, Zaki was able to see this episode first before all of us a while ago. So he's going to have to be kind of tight-lipped about what he knows about the show for the future, which should be an interesting exercise. But I actually would like to throw it to Ty first, just because, Ty, you had told me in a previous episode recording that you're absorbing TOS for the first time. So you have none of the baggage that I do when it comes to absorbing Strange New Worlds, and you're just kind of coming up to speed on the adventures of Captain Kirk. So you're also like probably a more dispassionate perspective, certainly than me. How did Strange New Worlds just overall strike you?
Yeah, like I'm more familiar with, Christopher Pine or whatever his version of the character. This show was awesome. Like, there was a ton of buzz about it, and I know a lot of people, like, I kind of was tempering my expectations a little bit, right? Because some of the people who seem most excited about the potential for this show also were some of the people who seem most vitriolic about some of the other new Trek shows that I've really loved. And so I was just a little like, I was trying to be open-minded about it, but I was trying to avoid being kind of like in the tank, right? Because I just didn't want to necessarily like throw in my lot there,
Yeah,
like
sure.
without
That's a good
knowing
idea.
what I was getting
a good
into.
idea. I just want to get that clear. That is a very good idea.
From the first images and sounds on the screen, I've mentioned a few times on the show, I usually watch most things with my wife, Julia. I mean, we were just constantly turning to one another, just with huge grins on our faces, just saying, "This is so cool. This is so awesome." I don't remember if Janeway narrated like the pilot of Voyager or something, but the standard intro for that is definitely
you're right.
instrumental.
Picard,
so it's been
this
like
goes
a
back
long
to
time.
Picard.
And for me, like I think I mentioned on my very first time on the show, like my earliest memories of Star Trek are like as a little kid watching TNG, like with my dad and my brothers and stuff like that. So that introduction and that narration is still pretty iconic to me, but in sort of a different way. But oh my gosh, just yeah, like we'll dig into it. But I mean, it was so like what I love about Star Trek. But it also just like you could kind of feel the bits of fan service, and it just felt so like exciting. And I'm so like we'll talk about it, but like one thing I'm really excited about that I just want to mention is like I'm so pumped that we will get time to dig in to know these characters on the bridge, or at least some of them. I don't know who's sticking around permanently, maybe some are temporary and won't be around for long or something like that. But like, in Disco, we had to wait like 4 seasons to have it confirmed. Like, yeah, Owoshikun is as cool as she seems, right? Like there is a real depth to the character there. And I don't think we're going to have to wait 4 seasons to get one episode that's like a little bit of a spinoff and is kind of the side story for Ortegas or for Uhura. I mean, obviously we're going to get plenty of, but oh man, it was awesome though. Like it was, one of the most fun times I've had watching TV in recent memory for sure. And it's just left me so excited to see what's coming up.
Excellent. Very well said. Thank you. Rachel. I know that there might be a little bit of osmosis in terms of me, but your overall impressions before we dig in.
Well, it's always great to watch something with somebody who is extremely enthusiastic. So you don't need to apologize for that because it's really great. And yeah, but you were crying throughout like most of it. Which was like, I was mostly happy. I only cried at the end when I got emotionally destroyed. When I was like, oh no, it's making me feel hope. I can't process this emotion. I don't know. And I got overloaded and I started crying. But yeah, I feel similarly to you guys. It was so much fun to watch. And I just I loved the little bits of fan service. I adored the like oh Captain, or oh it's Kirk, I need this Kirk guy, and then it's Sam Kirk. Loved it. Loved that bait and switch. And I we'll talk about more about the things I liked, but I've probably the only, I'm not sure, but I think I'm the only person on the panel who is very attracted to men. And I must say that this show really played to that as well, with Hot Spock and Scruffy Pike. And and of course, Pike being hot, of which he always is, but I like
What?
Scruffy Pike too.
Really?
So, yeah.
Look, and it's even worse because I can't grow a beard to save my life. So
I feel like that's Anson Mount's quarantine beard, because I remember seeing pictures of him in quarantine, like selfies he would take, and I was almost angry at how attractive he was. I was like, no man has any excuse to look that good with a crazy quarantine beard. What's going on here?
He found a way. Cicero, your overall impressions of the first episode?
I adore what they are doing with new Star Trek. You know, I love Discovery. I love the way that it came in. It was audacious. Um, I love the fact that they're taking risks with Picard. They don't always hit, but they're out there doing something different. And all of the other serialized shows that Paramount Plus has produced in this franchise, I've found some kinship with, but this is almost, and it almost will sound hyperbolic, but this is almost like coming home, right? Like this is almost, um first off, when you get that narration in the beginning, you get the space, the final frontier, right? Like it wasn't as emotional for me as it was for you, Chris, and you know, and I think that there are definitely legions of people for whom it was as emotional for them as it was for you. I was not amongst those people, but that moment right there definitely made my hair stand up on end. Like, oh yeah, like it's that moment when you finally come home and you're getting mom's cooking. It's been a long time since you've been home, and you smell mom's chicken pot pie, and that, it just reminds you, like, oh, this is what makes this place special, right? And like that narration really reminded me of that, and then the rest of the episode confirmed that, right? And the fact that we're to Ty's point, right, the fact that we're not necessarily resetting back to zero on every episode, but the fact that it is going to be more episodic, and that means that the through line will be the crew, right? Which means that we will be able to spend time getting to know at least the principal crew members. But they've done a great job of introducing some that I think will, should pay dividends over the course of the season. And I love that fact. I love the fact that that's going to be the thing that they're going to be doing. And all they have to do is find Star Trek worthy episode stories, right, for each episode, and not arcs. And I think there's a potential for them to be a lot more successful doing that than they have been doing serialized stuff. And I'm here for it. I'm here for it. It feels good right now. Whatever you're
Excellent.
doing, don't stop, baby.
Well said, as always. So Zaki, your journey with new Star Trek. I mean, obviously you've been on this show and you've been far from a lamenter, I guess, in terms of the current direction of the Star Trek franchise. But when things don't hit, you naturally point that out, as you should when we talk about these new episodes. But considering your journey and considering your well documented love of the original series as well, how did this all come together for you overall?
When we got our first glimpse of the Enterprise at the season 1 finale of Discovery, I remember us having a discussion. My recollection is talking through sort of having to make the mental switch in my head where, up until this point, whenever Star Trek revisited the technology or era of the original series, they made efforts to make it look like that original series. And the redesign of the Enterprise marked a break from that. And I remember saying, like, I had to make that adjustment, right? And it wasn't a big adjustment, but I was like, okay, this is what we're doing now. This is how we're going to look back on this. And then and that then made it easier to sort of accept whatever visual changes were going to be in effect. But I very distinctly remember Captain Pike beaming onto Discovery, walking onto the bridge of that ship, and being like, I want a whole show about this. Give me the show. Give me the series, And then as the season progressed, every little tease that we got made me more confident that we were for sure going to get an Enterprise-based show. When we saw the Bridge of the Enterprise, I was like, they're not just going to build that just to break. Like it's an investment. So I kept moving towards that, and so I had every confidence that the show. And actually, in fact, it's funny because I had opportunity to meet Anson Mount a couple of years ago. This would have been probably 2019, and I got a picture with him, and he was great to my kids, which I'm so grateful for. And then I tweeted the picture, and I tagged him in it, and people were commenting, and I posted under that picture. I posted a GIF of somebody being impatient, and I said, "This is me being impatiently waiting for them to announce a Captain Pike show." And Anson Mount liked that tweet, and that's when I was like, I think this show is happening, because why would he hit like on it, And so it was like this march towards destiny. And so the fact that it turned out it's A, that it's been made, B, it's such a loving homage to that era of Star Trek, and it hits all these bases, and it's such a, in my opinion, it's such a riposte by the current minders of the franchise, towards all the people who are like, oh, these people don't know what they're doing. I'm like, yeah, they do. Because there's that sense, right? They're entitled fandom, which Star Trek is not the only fandom where people feel entitled, but there's this sense of like, oh, they hate Star Trek, or they hate Star Wars, or the people who are doing it. And I'm like, well, they might have a different view, but that doesn't mean they hate it. And to me, you look at this, and I don't know how you could watch this and feel anything but just a deep well of affinity for specifically the original series, and that those characters, and this real effort to work in and around canon and maybe stretch it at the edges, but trying very hard not to break it. I mean, I appreciate all of that.
Yeah. No, of course. So very, very well said, as usual. Well, we don't have anywhere else to go but to talk about the episode itself. So we've just got a few little sections here that we've split it into. Again, credit to the fine editors over at the Star Trek Strange New Worlds page on Wikipedia for providing a very svelte summary of the episodes. I have bolstered it in places in order to expand on detail that they just didn't include for brevity purposes, I assume. So let's jump into it. In the 23rd century, Starfleet Admiral Robert April recalls Captain Christopher Pike of the Starship Enterprise from shore leave after Pike's first officer, Una Chin Riley, referred to as Number One, goes missing during a first contact mission. Pike is reluctant to return to space and confides in Vulcan Science Officer Spock, who has just become engaged to T'Pring, that he saw a vision of his own death during their mission with the U.S.S. Discovery. So that's a very basic approach. The way that this episode started, and I'm going off on a slight tangent here again, I mentioned that one of the articles that I would obsessively absorb was April's. And just because it seemed like, wow, this is the first captain of the Enterprise. How have we not seen or heard more about this guy? I got a little flutter in my chest in the first season of Discovery when Saru was Googling how to be a good captain. You remember that one? And April's name came up alongside Captain Pike's. And so that was a nice little homage. We read the Drastic Measures novel by friend of the show, Dayton Ward, who included Captain Pike at the end of that on the retelling of the Tarsus 4 events that traumatized a young James Kirk. And but we actually got to see him this time. And he's actually a living, breathing character to potentially explore further. It seems like he's going to show up more, and I can't tell you how thrilled that makes me. But I love how when Pike is reintroduced in Discovery, they added the fact that he was April's first officer, and that's how he had his path to command of the Enterprise. It's just a very nice way to sort of condense things, and it makes sense because that happens. We've seen it before. But this was just a beautiful. It's a interesting sort of dichotomy that the show presents at the beginning. Well, the very first thing that we see is the alien species that it very much looks like a an early 21st century United States, but contrasting that with the earthy, natural setting that Pike has placed himself into before. Admiral April shows up and kind of interrupts that with a shuttlecraft flying over a horse. I thought that was just kind of a cool way to set up that, hey, the world has come to claim Captain Pike again. What did you guys make of this opening up through, and even the stuff with Spock, up through the point where Pike actually does agree to return to the Enterprise? Cicero?
Yeah, well, this is, I mean, at this point, we're getting the setup. I like the fact that Pike feels comfortable enough to confide in Spock. I mean, they clearly have gone through something traumatic, both of them, right? Spock losing his sister, and Pike, while also losing his friends and comrades, seeing his death and feeling his death. The fact that they were both so candid with each other was really great. And it, the one problem that it creates for me is that I feel like there should be a friendship between the two of them that is as strong as the friendship, the brotherhood between Spock and Kirk. And like it seems like they're bonding right away, and that's it's definitely a testament to the strength of the actors and the characters and the way that they're portraying them. But it, the pedantic continuity canon nerd in me is really worried about like them creating too strong of a bond, because it's, then it's like, all right, well, how is Spock cheating on Pike with Kirk?
Well, if I can dip in on that, I think what's interesting to me is that it's a slightly different flavor, because there is a bit more of a, if not a mentor mentee, it's kind of a big brother relationship that Pike has with Spock. And the other thing is, clearly there has to be enough of a foundation here that Spock would be willing to throw his entire career away to help Pike, right?
Sure.
So in other words, like, I feel like this entire series will be a journey that makes us fully understand exactly why Spock does what he does in the menagerie.
Yeah,
right.
the menagerie is definitely like a sticking point with that. I get where you're coming from, Cicero, especially just because, we understand so much about the Kirk Spock dynamic and how they clearly developed a friendship that is so legendary in a number of ways. But yeah, I mean, I also like the menagerie always stands out as a TOS 2. I mean, the only TOS 2-parter, but just like Spock is really going nuts here. Like he's really doing a lot that puts himself and potentially others at risk. What's so worth that? And if we have a show that answers that question, that's great. But I am with you in the sense that, the friendship between Spock and Kirk that we know probably has some longer legs with it. We don't want to see just a copy of that relationship either. Like if Pike and Spock are going to have such strong bonds, then it needs to come from a little bit of a different place. And because there is something that I guess Spock and Kirk feel more like peers, and Pike and Spock, it does feel like Pike has some more seniority in, at least in the way that the dynamic has been laid out thus far. But it's a balance they're going to have to walk. So I totally understand where you're coming from. Ty, the opening of the episode, everything up through Pike actually stepping aboard the Enterprise for the first time. How did it strike you?
Yeah, like they're playing with pieces that I'm like sort of familiar with, but that don't like maybe have as much weight to me as to some of you guys. A few things that stood out to me. I really liked them portraying. I have a good friend whose criticism of Star Trek is always that there's not enough sex, and that makes it unrealistic. I liked the portrayal at the beginning of Pike having an adult kind of like fling, recurring fling type of relationship in a way that felt mature and realistic and not really sensationalized, but did also tell you something about the character. So for me, I just thought seeing that portrayal of that relationship was a little bit of a new flavor for Star Trek, but kind of a, an update that felt like tasteful and made sense. I also liked that April sort of like, you think you're going to get this sequence of Pike like having this internal battle, right, of like whether to return, and he's just like, no, I'm not really asking you to do this. This is an order. Like, you have, I don't know, 8 hours or something like that before I want you out there in the Enterprise. And so compared to especially some, it seems to be pretty common in modern TV, but especially some of the other new Trek shows, seeing things move at what feels like a rapid pace at the beginning of a season was really nice. And I just, oh man, I just have to tag because Rachel mentioned some of the eye candy in this show, and because my wife Julia does not listen to this show, I mean, everyone on this show is gorgeous in some way or another. But you mentioned T'Pring. I don't even want to say anything about it because it's inappropriate, but I just thought she was a lovely and classy person, and I am happy for Spock.
Hey, take that someplace else, to quote the book.
Rachel,
you'll be happy to know, Ty, that T'Pring is in 13 episodes according to IMDb, more than any other cast member.
That is interesting, huh? All right, well,
she does come back shortly. Yeah,
they got a lot to unpack there, sure. Because, well, Rachel, jump on that first, and then feel free to talk about the other attractive people if you want to. But when it comes to Spock, because we haven't really touched on him yet, Amok Time is one of the most classic episodes of the original series. And so seeing our introduction to Spock in this show through a relationship that we know is doomed.
Sure. Yeah.
What did you think of that?
It was surprising because my internal headcanon had always been that they were sort of an arranged marriage that just wasn't going to go anywhere. So I think knowing that they had some sort of actual relationship beforehand was pretty, I was like, oh, okay. And then she has to propose to him, and apparently they can have sex when they're not in Ponfar, which I did not know. So I'm learning so many things about Vulcans and their biology. I'm fascinated.
Well, like, I guess just the idea of Ponfar too, like they just need to then, right? Like it doesn't, they're not restricted.
That's right.
All the other times.
Yeah. But I mean, also too, like the TOS is certainly guilty of making the Vulcans perhaps overly ritualistic.
Sure. Yeah.
So, having some additional nuance in the courtship rituals at least seems appropriate for the modern time. But yeah, Spock, shirtless Spock. Spock's never been a beefcake before.
Yeah. No, yeah. I feel like Ethan Peck's been like working out or something. Like he seems a little bit bigger.
Ethan Peck's, am I right?
Yeah,
nice.
Ethan Peck's. Yeah. But yeah, like, I don't know. I mean, Spock's always been hot. Like, women have always loved Spock.
That's true.
And, like,
it is true.
I have to say too, watching them flirt and that build up to the proposal and everything, it felt like a writing showcase. I mean, like you were talking about, I think Zaki, like, how can you say these people don't like or don't understand Star Trek? And we got so many different kind of like flavors, right? Of probably plenty more to come, but it was really fun for me to see that playful style of writing that I think is sometimes doesn't land super well in a lot of the Star Trek that I've seen. Like when TNG tries to be playful, it's like, I don't know, it's a real crapshoot whether that's gonna land, right?
Sexist somehow. I don't know.
Right, like right. It's always ambiguously but inevitably sexist in some way. You're right, but yeah, this just felt like, okay, cool. Like we're gonna get to explore, like I mentioned even before with Pike, these kind of different, all kinds of different tones and themes throughout. How many episodes do we have this season? Do you guys know?
10, I believe.
I believe it's 10. Yeah.
Cool.
No, that's cool. Well, before we move along with the plot, Zaki, when it comes to T'Pring specifically, and knowing a mock time as well as you do, certainly, we talked before about how maybe this show will help to justify or additionally justify Spock's actions in the menagerie. What do you think that these new stories with T'Pring could maybe do to a rewatch of a mock time?
Well, as it happens, I watched the first 5, and then I did revisit a mock time shortly thereafter, and I'm assuming that T'Pring, so she shows up at least one more time that I know. As Cicero alluded to, she's probably going to be back more. So I think, knowing that we are headed towards the dissolution of this relationship, I think adds this extra texture, because clearly Spock like has feelings for her, right? Like, so that, I think, having that baked into when you watch a mock time, and knowing like he's not just going back to Vulcan like, oh, I got to marry this woman. No, he loves her, right? He cares about her, and she's going to break his heart like that. I like that extra. To me, it's no different than we watch the entire show knowing what's going to happen to Pike, right? And and Pike knows what's going to happen to Pike, but again, it's that element of us knowing where the journey's going that adds nuance to where we are right now in the story.
Yeah, yeah. And by that same token, I also appreciated how it just started laying the groundwork for this distaste that she has for chasing him, I think is what she said. So maybe that is a contributing factor to Ston apparently jumping in Spock's stead. But let's move along with the plot. So the Enterprise travels to the planet Kylie 279, which is in a similar state to 21st century Earth and on the brink of civil war. They've reverse engineered a weapon from Starship warp drives after witnessing the Discovery mission in nearby space, but instead of creating faster than light travel, they've created a warp bomb that could inflict untold devastation on the planet. Pike and his crew rescue Number One from captivity, but are soon after caught by the planet's authorities when their genetic disguise begins to break down and reveal that they are extraterrestrials. So there's a lot to unpack here, because this, I feel, is the major moment where it's doing the most Star Trek-y of Star Trek things, in trying to tell us stories about ourselves while also taking place in these fantastical environments. Cicero, the idea, I mean, as someone who is at this point very familiar with the concept of first contact, the subversion of that and the creation of a bomb, was that unexpected for you? It was certainly unexpected for me, but how did all of that combine for you?
It was definitely unexpected, but also quite obvious when you think about it, right? Like, because they set them up as being the analog to American humans in the 21st century at the beginning of the episode, right? Or at least the latter half of the 20th century, right? Like they were in space, they had their mission control center. It sounded very, very American. And then you see these people that are clearly not human. But they're American, whatever their version of that was. So if we got some great technology that could advance us light years in terms of scientific advancements, what will we do with it? We try and kill somebody with it, right? Like that's what we would do. It was like, oh yeah, duh, of course, right? Like that's what they're gonna do. But I love the fact that the the Federation, right? The crew of the Enterprise just became aliens, right? Like they became aliens. They went there, they saw what was going on, they tried to blend in with the population, and then they started abducting people, right? So, like, and then once they were caught, it was take me to your leader. So like it was awesome to watch us be, us being humans, us be the aliens in that type of scenario where we've always seen it the opposite.
Ty, you spoke about just feeling like this was what you love most about Star Trek. Is this what you were talking about?
In some ways, yeah, some parts of it. It's like my favorite Jamie Foxx character on the live sketch show says, they not us, but they us. So yeah, I definitely did like that. And I agree with what Cicero said about the bomb. It's like a kind of obvious analog place to go. I think what made it really Star Trek-y for me sort of comes a little bit later that we'll probably talk about, where Pike saves the day, kind of figures out a bit of a resolution. But I did just want to tag what you mentioned about them blending in with the population. I love that this is clearly going to be an ongoing gimmick, is like head to the sick bay, and Dr. Mbenga is going to stand around and crack wise while Nurse Chapel changes your DNA. So that you can go on away missions and look like aliens. Like it's gonna, obviously the visual effects are like up to the task, and I'm really excited to see them play with that going forward.
Yeah, most definitely. Rachel, I think you're the most appropriate person to ask about the medical staff, because this is the point in the episode in which we are introduced to Dr. Mbenga and to Nurse Christine Chapel. And I looked over at you as Chapel was explaining how the disguises work, kind of like a question, and you just immediately shook your head. Like, no, that's not a thing.
It was gibberish.
Yeah.
I like it.
But that's okay. That's Star Trek.
Tech the tech. Like, that's what it said in the
right.
in the script.
Yeah.
Biology, the biology.
Trademark Zaki Hasan. But what did you think of being introduced, or reintroduced, I should say, to Dr. Mbenga and to Nurse Chapel? Do you think that we're going to see Dr. Mbenga slap Spock around again?
I don't remember that episode, so yeah. I mean, I felt like we didn't get very much time with Dr. Mbenga, but like what we did get was enough that like I have warm feelings towards him. So I'm excited to get to know him more. I like Nurse Chapel. I liked her running around the ship looking for the escaped abductee.
I lost an alien.
Yeah, and I just really enjoyed that, like, when they abducted the people, they like just didn't quite know how to like anesthetize them correctly and stuff.
And they tear down the corridor, and there's other crew members, but it's not like security's going to tackle this guy. So they're just like, oh, okay, that person's running around.
Alien running down the corridor. It's fine. Yeah, but I liked that. That's a nice little nod to the fact that like it's such a like silly thing that like everyone in Star Trek has such compatible biologies. You can use the same medical techniques on all of them and stuff. So it's a nice little nod to the fact that if we ever do find aliens, they'll probably be so biologically different from us that we're not going to be able to breathe the same air. But, you know, let alone know how to anesthetize them. So.
That's what cetacean ops are for.
Yeah.
You know?
Sure. The guild.
Zaki, what do you think of the subversion of a typical first contact with the warp bomb, but also being reintroduced to these other classic characters that we know from TOS, including Dr. Mbenga, Nurse Chapel, and I mean Uhura is certainly in there too, and she had a pretty big role to play at this point in the episode.
I'll echo what Cicero said about the warp bomb being something that feels entirely of a piece with what stupid current humans would do. Wow, this thing can make us travel, across the galaxy. Let's blow somebody up with it. Yeah, that sounds about right. Um, and I liked the just the subversion of the point of view sort of reminded me of uh, oh god, I think it's called First Contact, right? The episode of Next Generation, right? Where Riker is the alien and people are reacting to him. As far as the legacy characters, it's funny because I'm just my interactions with a lot of other fans. They're like twisting themselves in knots about like, well, how can Uhura be? And she doesn't act like she's, and what's Christine Chapel doing there? And I'm like, you gotta let this go. Like it's here, it is, and you can connect the threads in your head to make it work. But the show is what it is, And I really I don't have a problem connecting this Christine Chapel to the one we see in the original series, and especially as the season goes on, it's just we get a little more insight into her character. I like it. Again, one thing I'm realizing, canon is a prison of the mind, and it's like if you let it be, and a lot of people want to do that, and I'm like, man, life's too short. I got real things to worry about. And Star Trek it's not a prison for me. It's an escape,
Well, you know what? Let's briefly go on a tangent and pursue that line of thought. Because there is often, I feel like these debates are very common, and I think all of us here, because of our different levels of familiarity with different kinds of genre fiction, are all too familiar with it. Let's pursue this for a second.
Pedantic continuity time.
There's an old throwback.
Nice.
Honestly, so I just on my own time, because all I do on my own time is stuff related to Star Trek. Just looking at Uhura's actual canonized history, there really is none. Like, if people are having to jump through hoops to try and justify this, they don't need to. That's the end of pedantic continuity time. There is no history for Uhura. Really, she's made a couple of mentions. The new shows have actually done a lot to establish what she did later in her career. But her first assignment has now been established by this show. So, yes, there have been rafts of material having to do with the TOS crew, every member of the TOS crew from before they joined the Enterprise, during Kirk's 5-year mission specifically. However, that's not canon. And any Star Trek fan worth their salt, I'm sorry, should know that. They don't need to be jumping through these hoops. It is totally viable for a cadet to be getting field time on a starship, on the bridge of what is conceivably, at least, I mean, they haven't codified it, I don't think specifically, but for all intents and purposes, the Enterprise is the flagship of the Federation. Maybe they even said it was in Discovery when Pike was jumping down Admiral Cornwell's throat about not participating in the war. Yeah. But if you want to get into the continuity mechanics of Uhura's time before the Enterprise, this show gets to write that because, frankly, they didn't have the foresight to give her that substantive history before. So what are you getting bent out of shape about? And the same is really true of Nurse Chapel. Like, we know a couple of details about her early life, but they're really bits and pieces. We don't know a ton about her career or what her focuses have been. So this show gets to play with those things. And what's wrong with bringing those characters in? I am the nerdiest Star Trek canon. I don't want to say gatekeeper because I don't think I do that, but I know this pretty well in comparison to most people, present company accepted. But there's very few justifications to jump down this show's throat from that basis. So that just leads me to believe that's not what you really think. You're trying to jump at this show from another angle. You just don't want to say the quiet part out loud.
Well, if I can respond to that, I think what I've found is oftentimes people's complaints about canon come down to, well, now this new thing means my knowledge is incomplete. Like, I was the expert and now you're telling me I'm no longer the expert. And so it comes from this place of personal injury. And I mean, I can attest to people's reactions 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, when Enterprise was announced. And it was, this is the first Enterprise, and it's Jonathan Archer. And no, there is no first Enterprise. There's no, the first Enterprise is NCC 1701. And it just say, well, no, I mean, that now this is it, right? Like, it's all fiction, buddy. It's whatever it is. And people like got real upset about that, right? And you see it with Michael Burnham. Well, Spock didn't have a sister. Well, now he does, right? And I remember it's I just had this discussion with somebody a couple of days ago where somebody's like, I think it's BS that Spock had a sister. We never heard about the sister. And I'm like, how many episodes and movies about Star Trek mention Spock's brother, Sybok? Once, and he's never mentioned again. How many times was Sam Kirk mentioned? Once and never again. It's canon until it isn't. Or it's not canon until it is, rather, right? I mean, that's just how it is.
Well, yeah, and I mean, it's just people in denial about who actually gets to determine what is and isn't canon. The people who make the shows, that's what they get to decide. And if you're going to approach it from the basis of fidelity to the canon, that's just a sham of a justification for the grievances that you're trying to talk about. And oh no, your information is out of date, then watch the damn show. It's not that hard. Your information can rather quickly get up to date by just watching the new shows. Oh, but I don't like them. Well, then devote yourself to something else, because okay, you knew Star Trek at a preserved point in amber, right? And you don't want to keep up with it anymore, so say goodbye.
Yeah.
Don't get all bent out of shape about it.
Can I say and ask something that might further upset the audience that we were discussing? I didn't know until, I guess, maybe this conversation that Mbenga and April were returning characters. Those were individuals I was not yet familiar with. And I just want to ask about Laan, our new security officer. Is this a character that we are already familiar with?
No.
Or is this... Okay, cool.
And April is tricky just because he has been mentioned in other things. And he did have an appearance in the animated series, but the canonicity of the animated series is rather dubiously defined, at least right now, and might be a little more dubiously defined after this episode in particular. However, what, like in the Star Trek Encyclopedia article that I read, the Okudas talked about how they had a picture of Gene Roddenberry that had a Starfleet uniform photoshopped onto it. That was Robert April. That was the image that we knew of Robert April for a long time afterward. So but Dr. Mbenga was only in it. Oh, yeah, please.
No, I mean, Robert April is such a perfect example. He existed in one episode of the cartoon, and he was a white guy, and now he's Uncle Phil. He's the new Uncle Phil. And people are losing their minds. And I was naive enough to think there was no way people could find a way to complain about this. Because when I saw the first episode, I was like, Robert April, oh my gosh. And naively, I was like, that is crazy. The first captain of the Enterprise is Uncle Phil, And like 3 days later, Twitter had a meltdown because he was white in one cartoon show 40 years ago, 50 years ago almost, and now he's black, and that's unconscionable.
Yeah, well, I mean, I just thought
Star Trek fans. These are Star Trek fans.
Yeah, people who I lamented the fact that it seems like a fair amount of vocal Twitter Star Trek fans seem to agree with the likes of Colonel Green these days, which is very disconcerting. But I certainly can't speak to a level of authority. Cicero, what did you make of the recasting of Captain April, or I should say Admiral April, now that that Zaki has brought that component up?
Well, I mean, there are isms in the world, and there is one ism that trumps them all. I'm no stranger to that ism, and it never surprises me when that ism does what it does, because it will do what it does, and it is very, very consistent, and resilient. But look, I lament the fact that you two gentlemen, and as a result of being in the show, that I've definitely fallen more into Trek Twitter. But I lament for the two of you. You have also fallen into the Trek Twitter where the shit posting is happening, and I either I'm not in that portion of Trek Twitter, or I just don't engage in those conversations. So I generally get to miss them. But I know that they exist.
Let me just briefly say real fast,
Yes.
because on that point, when things piss you off, it's easy to want to talk more about that. And I certainly fall
Absolutely.
into that trap a lot. And I really
100%.
shouldn't. There are some
100%.
wonderful people
Yes.
that are active on Star Trek Twitter. And I wish that we could all just leave and go somewhere else and just talk about Star Trek and be happy, because
Right.
that's honestly like Star Trek Twitter, the real Star Trek Twitter, where the vast majority of the material originates from.
Right.
That's like 95% of the reason I'm even on Twitter is because of Star Trek Twitter. And that's because of the very good people that are there. Friends of the show, certainly, that we've met because of that rather tight-knit, open, and accepting community who are all too able and willing to embrace the ideals of infinite diversity and infinite combinations. You know, those are the good ones. And I don't want to minimize the existence of those people. It's just a shame when those arguments that Zaki alludes to and that you've alluded to manage to creep into the edges. But you are absolutely right to point that out. They just creep in at the edges, and they certainly don't define that
sometimes
segment.
It almost feels like there's some kind of darn algorithm feeding them to you, because anger is an engaging emotion.
What is this you say? But I do want to say that it is important that we still have like, so infinite diversity and infinite combinations includes the shit posters.
Yes.
Right. So in that way, I welcome that, right? Because you can't have a utopia where everywhere is a hegemony, right? Is basically the Borg, right? It's a collective, and that's not what we're here for, right? We need some diversity of thought. We need some opposition. We need people to come in and say that this is a problem, and that helps further things along. That helps progress.
Yep, very well said. We'll let's move along with the plot, because there's a lot more we could unpack from that if we want to, but we'll leave that for another time. But so later on in the episode, Pike ultimately chooses to break Starfleet's General Order 1 by interfering in the society to convince them not to use the weapon that they have just developed. One of the ways they accomplish this, they being the crew of the Enterprise, is by showing this society the deleterious impact of and effects of hyperpartisanship, which on Earth led to the outbreak of the Third World War and total global devastation that killed a third of the planet's population. Earth's example helps to convince the leaders of this planet to avoid their destruction by finding a better, more peaceful path, potentially through membership with the Federation. So this is really like the money point. This is what Tyler had alluded to before about Captain Pike doing what he can to try and dissuade a terrible outcome that is all too familiar. And there's a very he who is without sin cast the first stone kind of vibe to what Pike is saying to these people. Zaki, in this moment in particular, this is really a major culminating moment of this episode. Walk us through how this impacted you, especially getting to see it when you did. But this is very much like a Star Trek punctuation.
Yeah, well. First off, the fact that Pike, Spock, and Lon they rescue the crew members. They're about to be beamed up, and then Pike finds out the reason that how the people got the technology, and he agonizes over it, and he makes the most Star Trek captain of decisions, saying, "Look, this is our fault. We're going to fix this." and that right there, it's the dilemma of command, right? And that's that's why these are the characters um, we lionize. We try to emulate, hopefully. And the solution he arrives at was it felt very very Kirk like. I mean, it's not destroying Lander or whatever, but it's that sense of, yes, I'm going to break the rules because there's a principle at work here, and that's again, it's very much, it's really, I was having this discussion with my brother. I was like, the end of the episode, it was like it was a Kirk like solution, but a Picard like execution, if that makes sense. Because he does, it's kind of a who watches the watchers kind of thing, and it's here's another cool thing. I'm my oldest, he's 15 now, and he's a Star Trek fan. I mean, he's been a Star Trek fan most of his life, and he gets to really experience this from the ground floor. And he watches the end, and Pike gives his speech, and he turns to me. He's like, "What a great captain's speech!" Because he knows Star Trek captains, they give them speeches, And so I've watched that. I was telling Chris before we got on, I've watched that speech that Pike gives. I've watched it multiple times, and I find it so necessary, so invigorating, because it's what we need right now. Like, it's like Pike speaking to us across the chasm of time, right? That's what we need to do. And we're at this moment. And that's what Star Trek is, isn't it? Like, it's about the idea that we can get past our worst moments, and hopefully it won't take World War III to get there. And there are days, there are weeks like right now where it just feels like as far away as ever, the idea that we could ever have that future. And yet that's why Star Trek has lasted this long, because it gives us something unlike any other science fiction. It says we're going to make it. Eventually we'll get there. I don't know. Sorry. I'm like, these are all the thoughts that are bouncing around in my head right now.
You're in good company. And I think that that's very well expressed, and it's certainly something that we all want. And it's nice that a show is there, but I'll just leave you by saying, a captain of the Enterprise broke the Prime Directive. That sounds about right. So,
a captain of the Enterprise necessitated it being called the Prime Directive.
Yeah. I wonder if Luxley would have anything to say about Pike's breaking the Temporal Prime Directive. That remains to be seen, but we'll see.
Yeah, so I would just say that that third act, the call was coming from inside the house, right? Like, they were definitely talking about us. That entire speech, the entire just kind of rollout that Pike just, that dissertation that Pike gave was all about us, and where we are today as we're watching that episode. Yeah. He's talking about me.
He is. But at the same time, too, I mean, we kind of need to hear it, right? Like, it doesn't feel, or at least it didn't to me, it didn't feel like necessarily like an admonishment as much as just like a gentle warning.
Right. It was a cautionary warning. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, the problem mostly, right. And we've already kind of articulated that, illustrated that it's not necessarily true, but the problem mostly is that when Star Trek has these moments where they're trying to teach these lessons, that they're turning around, they're preaching to the choir, right? Mostly. As we're learning, as people get older, certain things don't necessarily, certain beliefs and tenets that they hold are kind of incongruent with their love for this franchise. But for the most part, most people remain true to it. And so it's rough when they give these types of speeches and they say these types of things and they provide that level of hope, which is great for us. But I always feel like I'm not the audience for this, right? Like I am the audience for this, but I'm not the audience that needs to hear this, right? Because I already believe this, right? I already believe the thing.
Maybe you'll show it to someone who does need to hear it.
Maybe.
But I did need to hear it though.
Yeah.
And I
Okay.
can't be the only person because I feel like I had to quit social media because it would make this worse, but I have this feeling so often of like, well, we're fucked. Like, there's nothing to do. I don't know.
Right.
Like, this is
Right.
like can't do anything.
Right.
Like, I think what it's called being a doomer, right? Like,
Yeah, with doom scrolling. I mean,
yeah, like a doomer. Like, it's
Right.
well, we're fucked. There's nothing.
You're a baby doomer.
Yeah, there's nothing we can do.
Right.
And for me, just hearing him say that, you know, the future's not written, like it's
Right.
still, you can like, there's still some things can be done, is like, yeah, that's what I do need to hear that on a regular basis.
Right.
I do need to hear like, okay, well, what are we gonna do? Like, yeah, we like shit's real bad, but
Right.
like, what can we do to fix it? Because, you know, you can do things. You can always do something,
Yeah,
or support something. So I mean, if it helps people not get into that mindset, because I mean, the thing that I always tell myself is that, you know, who wins when I give up trying to build a better world? Well,
Right.
you know, the oil companies win, and the
Right.
you know, the fascists win. They want me to just be like, okay, like
100%.
whatever. So, you know, it's important for people to remember that, you know, just
Sure.
because things seem bad, the future is not written.
Yeah, I guess that's a great point. I guess my perspective is a little bit different, because there's never been a time in this country in the history of this country, where someone who looks like me, like my ancestry, has had it in a place where, you know, there was nothing but hope, right? Like the hope that it would get better tomorrow, right? And you know, so like I've I always live there, right? I always live with the, you know, shit is fucked up, right? Because it is, right? Like if you look like me, it is, and it always is. And you know, but the thing that keeps you from just completely losing your mind is watching for incremental progress, and having that hope, having, you know, seeing, you know, finding those diamonds in the rough, and, you know, finding the silver linings, and really accentuating those silver linings, and doing your best to perpetuate that throughout the communities, so that there could be more of those, right? So that the roads are lined with silver. But knowing, you know, knowing also that at every single turn there are going to be so many obstacles in your way, that you just have to, you know, like that it is this eternal fight, to keep going. And that, you know, so I guess for me, that's the perspective that I'm coming from. So I'm just like, oh yeah, you know, like here we are. Yeah, I know this one. I've heard this song before. Amen.
Well, I mean, and I think that that lived experience does provide a lot of necessary context. But even with all of that, Cicero, do you feel like, I guess, were you disappointed then at the way that this came together, since it is a song you've heard before?
No, not at all. Not at all. Right. Like I wasn't disappointed like, I am here for that. Right. There are definitely times when, my reservoir for hope is low. Right. And, I definitely do come to Star Trek to get that tank replenished, right? A standout moment to me is episode 1 of season 4 of Discovery, when you know, Michael Burnham looks with her emotional eyes at the butterfly people, and and says, they ask why you're doing this, and she says, because we're the Federation. That's who we are. That's what we do. And when she looks at you with those eyes, you just like, oh, okay, right? But that definitely makes my heart grow 3 sizes that day, right? And this speech was no different in that way, right? Like that, but it my heart wasn't cold, right? Like it wasn't going into that message wasn't going into a heart that needed to be reformed. It was going into a heart that needed to be re-energized. And I would love for those messages to hit the hearts that need to be reformed.
Well, in a few hours from the time we're recording this, the first episode is going live on YouTube for a couple of weeks.
Oh,
so
awesome.
Spread it far and wide.
There you go.
Ty, you alluded a while back that this was a moment that really stuck with you. Walk us through it.
Yeah. Like, one thing I will say about this episode, just to kind of start with maybe, I guess, sort of a negative, like, like most, I guess this is a pilot. It sort of fills a spot that I think wouldn't work in some ways in other episodes of the season. If this were just some other episode in the bunch, I think the change was too big and too dramatic in what the people of Kylie 279 and kind of the two factions were, like Pike really turned this thing around, right? And I think like in TNG, one thing I always appreciated was that often success looked like the beginning of what was always acknowledged to be like a long and complicated process. And that was alluded to here. Like, I don't think they overdid it, but like there was this sort of like paper cutout of the Enterprise that the person was holding up that made it feel a little strong for me, right? But because it was the first episode and because they're trying to set a tone, I actually thought that like kind of almost overshooting, right, like the goodness of the impact of the Enterprise made me excited, right? Because like Cicero, I think it was you that mentioned earlier that you're kind of hoping we see lots more of these good like Star Trek-y kind of plots, and there's certainly doesn't seem to be a risk that they're not going to go for it, right? So that was cool. I guess, Cicero, I do understand what you're saying about the audience thing. For me, I guess like when I see the signs that specifically say audit the vote, it's like a mixed feeling thing for me, right? Part of me is proud that they speak the truth, right? And they just say the words that they mean and don't beat around the bush. But I do, there's people like to hate on things. And I felt like that might be an easy route for somebody to take, to just say, hey, it's not just that I don't like this show. This show seems like it's out to get, this show doesn't even seem like it likes me. So, but what do I think the chances are that audience is like really likely to watch Star Trek under any circumstances? Probably pretty low. But I did like I think it was Zaki, right, that mentioned this felt like maybe it was one of you guys that said it specifically, but it felt like a Kirk kind of plan and a Picard type of execution. And for me, Picard is the captain that feels like the most home, my home base captain. And so I really felt that this sort of firm, almost parental yet loving sort of combination of listening but also taking charge of the situation. And I loved that when we went from like the woman is just like, hey, what you're saying is nice, but whoever has the biggest stick wins. And he's just like, yeah, okay, I guess if that's the way that we have to do it, you're right. And the person with the biggest stick is me. And goes back to something that I've always really liked. And I think this was prominent in The Next Generation, which is like, we're not like, he doesn't have the biggest stick because just like humans are great or something like that. Like you see in a lot of other sci-fi, right? He has the biggest ship because, again, he's part of this larger organization, and this, like, there's these words that people hate. Like, he's part of this bureaucracy, right? But it's a bureaucracy that organizes people and holds people to standards and sets people up to cooperate in a way that enables them to do incredible things. And so I don't mind that they shortcutted how some of those incredible things work in this episode to remind us that those things are possible. And it's not because the force of one person's character is just so overwhelmingly good. It's not because of fate or destiny or something like that, right? It's because we can do it. There really is hope. Like it isn't predetermined, and people can do incredible things. I live in Chicago. The Chicago River used to flow one direction, and now it flows a whole different direction. That seems like super hard to me, right? But people work together like over 100 years ago to just like do that. Like people build skyscrapers, like we go to space. It's mind boggling, right? And so to see Pike kind of try and teach these people the lessons, like again, like almost like a parent, like, hey, I have suffered through this. This is something my people have direct experience with. Please, you avoid the same mistakes. I'm a little pessimistic, like, right? Like humans clearly knew what nuclear bombs did when World War III happened on the show, and that did not deter them. So I thought these people were pretty exceptionally like open-minded to be like, oh wow, yeah, killing people is really bad. But yeah, this is the part of the show that was emotional for me. I was excited. Like this is the part where I went from smiling and feeling excited and pumped up to kind of feeling like broken and just like, yeah, like I need this, you know what I mean? And like, we need this. And like this again, I'm repeating myself, but it's us. It's not this sci-fi about people in a galaxy far, far away,
Right.
that are similar to us. It's us, and so Kylie was like, say this weird like analogy of us, but I thought it was just so super relevant and powerful, and it really makes me hopeful for where they're going to go with this in the future, and just excited to see those stories.
Yeah, Rachel, I mean, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but as soon as the episode was over, like the first thing out of your mouth was that was great. Did this moment have a lot to do with that?
Yeah, well, I felt like, I agree with Ty that the people seem like they turned a corner real fast, but it also kind of implied it wasn't like right away, because I just loved those scenes of like the people studying the Enterprise and like, like thinking about the Enterprise. And like for me, I was like, oh, like it's justifying its own existence, and not just Star Trek, but like all sci-fi. Like it's like really like, oh, it can really just like make us, we can think about the Enterprise and study or like think about how things could be in a way that seems so absurd, but actually like can make us think about our own lives and our own society in just like a different way by like taking us to this like totally different world. And it just made me feel so happy and proud to be a fan of all of these things, and it made me reflect on the ways in which like not just Star Trek but like other sci-fi has like really expanded my mind and helped me to like be more open-minded and think about things in different ways. And so in that way, I was just like, this 1 hour of TV, it had so many things. It was like, I was entertained. I was horny. I was like, I was inspired.
We laughed, we cried.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It was just so many different emotions.
I forget what exact point in the episode it was, but I had this moment where I literally had to pause it and turn to my wife and say, like, this could be, I think it was when the Enterprise kind of first appears in the sky. Yeah. And I just had to say, like, this could be, like, this could happen, right? Like,
right,
so, like,
right, yeah.
And Star Trek has even done scenes similar to this before, but there's something about this depiction of, like, kind of the people looking up in the sky and the story so far that had brought us to that point that it kind of gave me chills.
Yeah, and the certitude, I think, certainly struck me, because when he does say, well, I've got the biggest stick, like it's more than just it's more than confidence. It's almost like he's reacting to a degree of petulance, and he knows that he's never in any real danger.
Right.
Like even if they pull guns on him, it's like, guys, come on. I'm on a whole other level. I'm just trying to help you. Just listen to what I have to say. But what I will say about the characterization and, back to kind of pedantic continuity time, we got a lot of information about what precipitated World War III. We've gotten the most information than I think we've ever really gotten outside of like combining the eugenics wars and World War III basically into the World War III is like the ultimate result of all of those smaller conflicts and introducing a second American Civil War, which is to me, that was the critical thing, because as much as it's like, oh, cool, we got a lot of really good information for the Star Trek canon nerd in me, another part of me who is active in the world that we live in today is weirdly like off-put and thankful of the way that they've characterized this, because it's World War III in previous depictions of Star Trek has always been kind of an abstraction. We see the results of World War III are briefly alluded to in First Contact. There's been some lip service about Earth going through a post-atomic horror, but the rather deft use of very familiar stock footage to the world that we live in now really puts into perspective that unless we check those passions, that's a very real result. Like, we have the capability to do that now. So what are we going to be like on the other side of that? I really hope that we don't have to go through that in our own world. But at the same time, I think that it's good to be reminded of the fact that this is a possibility. And we don't have to, like, it's all a choice. We don't have to give in to these baser impulses, and we don't have to continuously feed ourselves garbage that makes us distrustful of our neighbors and distrustful of people who might look differently from us or who think differently from us. We have a choice, and yes, it's a utopian vision. And I know that it's easy for people who might be a little more pessimistic, or people who even describe themselves as pragmatic, to look down on that. But really, like, if no one thinks that, then what's the end result going to be? If no one thinks that we can look beyond these rather, I don't want to downplay the fact that the differences that people are experiencing now are deep and embedded. But at the end of the day, if there's an existential threat to humanity that results from these divisions, then aren't they worth putting aside, or at least trying to? And having this show characterize the ultimate result of such discord being such rampant destruction, it's a weird flavor of hope, but it's there. And it's a really interesting way to introduce those ideas to the audience, to say something about the world we live in, and to add more to Star Trek's canon. So it's all it's all combining into this snowball of stuff that you can only get from this franchise.
We must if to borrow a phrase, we must choose to live.
Oh, got me right here, man. Yeah, it's true. And we have that choice. So we've only got like one very brief component of the episode left. So the crew of the Enterprise avoids repercussions because of the top secret nature of the Discovery mission, but Starfleet doubles down on General Order 1 by renaming it the Prime Directive. Pike recommits to his role and agrees to captain the Enterprise on a new 5-year mission of exploration. They also welcome Lieutenant George Samuel Kirk aboard as a science officer serving under Spock, and off to warp. We didn't really mention Liana Noonien Singh very much in this episode, although she was a rather critical character to the plot here. And, a lot of questions still surround her name. She is descended from someone who is kind of involved with what ultimately happens in World War III, as we now know. But she was a really cool character, and we got a lot of, just canonically speaking too, a lot of new information, horrifying information about the Gorn, species that we haven't seen since Enterprise, and that we haven't really gotten any real information about since the original series. So that was cool too, and I'm really fascinated to see what they end up doing with Lon Noonien Singh as a character. I mean, honestly, I can't wait to meet Horak in the next episode. The Enar, we're seeing an Enar for the first time since Enterprise. But that's where we're left with episode 1. Rachel, at the end of episode 1, just like take us. How does it leave you, especially now, several days later?
Well, I'm just super bummed I can't watch the next episode when it comes out because I'm gonna be going on a trip. So
You can watch it on a plane.
yeah, but I'm not going on a trip with you, so that means I have to figure out how to watch it on a plane by myself, and that just seems like a lot of work. Like, I'm gonna listen to an audiobook on the plane.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I'm just excited. I'm just excited to see more. I hope, and like you, I have this like anticipation of like, oh well, that peaked. Like it's probably just it's all downhill from here. So I'm really hoping that it stays good.
You got an end to an episode. You were doubtful of an episodic kind of structure, and there are going to be some character serialized moments, but structurally speaking,
Yes, there was a conclusion,
yeah,
which I did like.
very good. All right, well, we'll see if it maintains the momentum. Ty, final thoughts on this episode?
Yeah, I really liked it, and it's something about it, like being able to watch it on the day that it premieres and feeling like I am a part of that conversation as it's happening. I did that with Discovery and with Picard and stuff like that, but again, because this is the Enterprise, and just because of where this is in the timeline, it somehow feels like I'm invited to Star Trek in a new way by watching this show. Watching the original series alongside it is going to be fun, and I'm not the kind of person who's going to get overly distracted by any perceived conflicts or questions about the canon. It's all just kind of added texture for me to enjoy. But the thing that left me most excited is something that I mentioned earlier, which is just it really feels like, I'm just thinking back to TNG. We're going to get these episodes that really dig deep into certain characters. And, maybe we get it feels like we're going to have opportunities to kind of go through the little personal side quests of each of these crew members. And maybe I'm wrong, but it's really easy to picture, right, that one week we're going to have, it turns out Chapel, has this other side mission going on because she's on loan, right, from somewhere. And, Uhura is, this prodigy, but she's brand new and she's in training, and I don't know, is there some family thing she needs to figure out? Is there where are we gonna, what adventure are we gonna go on with her? And right on down the line through all these characters, and to have that room to just kind of live with them and sit with them and have those experiences without having this constant rush in the background, right, of worrying about what are we doing to advance the main arc of the story, right, I think is going to be a different pace of watching a different experience of watching Star Trek than I've become used to recently, and one that I'm really, really looking forward to. So it's a really nice kind of change of pace, but still wonderfully familiar in the weekly, stuff to watch routine.
Oh, sure. Yeah. We always do the portmanteau of the character name and episode. So there will be a Spock-isode, and there will be an Uhura-sode, and there's going to be a Chapel-sode, and, it's going to run a Horak-isode, maybe. We'll see. Cicero, what are your final thoughts, my friend?
I am eagerly looking forward to the next episode to see if we get a captain's log. If we get that opening VO of a captain's log, then I know that this is where we are right now. We're in familiar territory. And I think that would probably put me at ease in terms of them saying that they wanted to do an episodic type of show, and them really kind of there is a template for what a Star Trek episodic show sounds like. And if they follow that template, I think that'll make everyone feel good. It will definitely allow me to believe that they've got a focus, and there's going to be the Star Trek stories, right? Like we'll get some very Star Trek episodes that are self-contained episodes that present some of the very best of what this franchise has brought to us over the years. And if they do that, the thing that's going to be very interesting for me is seeing how they're able to do that in 10 episodes without us feeling like that's not even close to enough time with this crew, right? Whereas I felt like with all of the shows that we've watched so far in 10 or 12 or 14 episodes, I felt like, okay, like I need a break, right? I need a break from this crew because they've just been through too much. With these guys going on 10 separate adventures, that are kind of all self-contained adventures as they move along on their 5-year mission. I have this feeling won't be enough. And that's a great thing.
Sure. Yeah. No, very, very well said. I mean, I don't really have anything to add. I think I went pretty much as far as I could, other than to say that it's still fresh. This is the best episode of TV I've seen in a really long time, like a really long time.
Yeah.
I loved this episode. Like I said, I've been waiting for it for a long time. Maybe that's colored my perceptions. If you get back to me in a year, maybe I'll think differently. But even in comparison to other Star Trek pilots, this one seems like it might take the cake. I think about, I don't know, The Cage is kind of in a class all its own, but this is certainly better than Encounter at Farpoint. Right. This might be better than Emissary for DS9. It's probably better than Caretaker on Voyager.
Yeah.
Broken Bow's a really good pilot.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a little harder to say. Right now I'm leaning Strange New Worlds, but that just might be appeal to novelty on my part. Vulcan Hello was solid as a 2-parter though, so it didn't really get things done in one episode. And then, gosh, I can't even remember the first episode's title of Picard. But it was fine, but it wasn't this. And Lower Decks is a whole other thing. So this might be up there, when I run the gamut. But we'll see. I need to have a cooling off period when the season's over because I'm too into it right now. But nice to hear that. I think that at least when it comes to this panel, we're all reasonably uniform in our optimism for what this show presented. It's Star Trek classic. They're doing the Coca-Cola thing. It worked for them. Why not do it for Star Trek? And it seems like pretty solid results. I have rather unfairly, I think now, cursed Akiva Goldsman's name for his involvement in Batman and Robin. He's redeemed himself for what it's worth. But no, this is a stellar first episode, and I can't wait to talk about the others with all of you. This is going to be fun. But
looking forward to it.
Yes, most definitely. That's going to do it for episode number 76 of Discovery Debrief. We hope you enjoyed the show, and if you did, please like and follow us on our social media channels. And if you'd be so kind, we'd also appreciate it if you wrote a review for the show wherever you found it. It only takes a minute, and let us know you wrote one. We'll be happy to read your review on the air when it's posted. If you have any questions, you can follow the show on Twitter at DSC Debrief, where you can also find all of our individual Twitter handles. And feel free to send us questions through Twitter, our Facebook like page, or by emailing us at hailingfrequencies@discoverydebrief.com. Please be sure to set your courses for this feed for future episodes, and be sure to join us next time as we discuss, and I can't believe I'm saying this, the next adventure of the Starship Enterprise. The human adventure is just beginning. So until we meet again, please go boldly, my friends.